Spent his life teaching lawyers to faithfully interpret the Constitution and laws according to original meaning. I have no doubt that you learned this lesson very well. After clerking and a stint in private practice, you left D.C. behind to go home and serve as Assistant United States Attorney, Missouri. You worked diligently to prosecute criminals and keep the community safe. In 2017, you joined the Missouri Attorney General's office as a Solicitor General, where you served under two members of this committee, Senators Hawley and Schmidt. Serving as the state's chief appellate officer during the COVID pandemic and across two presidential administrations, you undoubtedly prepared you well for the role that you'll walk into after confirmation. There's a lot of work to be done defending our nation's laws, and it seems like you're well prepared. Ms. Dhillon, you're one of the nation's foremost experts on civil rights. Your journey started a long ways from here when your family emigrated from India. You went to Dartmouth at a very young age of 16, I'm told, and then went to law school at the University of Virginia. Throughout your career, you never shied away from unpopular but just causes. You served as director of an ACLU chapter after 9/11, a group many on my side are often skeptical of. You also started your own law firm and founded a nonprofit. You've litigated some of the most important cases on free speech, religious liberty, voting rights, and discrimination. Discrimination is wrong. Common sense ought to tell us that. Our Constitution, our civil rights laws do not tolerate determination on the basis of race, as the Supreme Court recently said in Students for Fair Admissions. Unfortunately, the previous administration not only allowed discrimination to take place, but openly encouraged it under the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That administration imposed nationwide regime of discrimination, and the Civil Rights Division completely failed to enforce our nation's laws. Our President Trump has put an end to this, and if confirmed, I know that you will work to help him execute his promise. Americans don't pick winners and losers based on color of skin, sex, or the name of their God. Ms. Dhillon, you fought for everyone to be treated equally. You fought against colleges shutting down free speech for political reasons, against states restricting freedom of religion, and against big tech companies engaged in censorship. You've won many victories defending freedom and our constitutional rights, and if confirmed, we'll need your continued leadership to protect the civil rights of all Americans. Our side of the aisle doesn't spend much time talking about people's personal characteristics. We care about character and we care about merit. But in addition to your qualifications, your backgrounds make you particularly suited to return the Justice Department to its proper role of enforcing our civil rights laws and ending discrimination. You're an immigrant, a religious minority, a woman, a business owner, a civil rights leader, an accomplished lawyer, and I've learned that also you do a lot of knitting. You're an example of what is great about America. Mr. Reitz, I'm to you now. You have an impressive and dedicated career of service to our country. You attended the College of Texas A&M University on an ROT scholarship and honorably served our country as a Marine, including tour in Afghanistan. Upon your return from Afghanistan, you attended law school, University of Texas, where you excelled. After a time in private practice, you decided to serve your country again. You clerked for the now Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court. Then you ran for a seat in the Texas House of Representatives and campaigned on issues you believed in. You continued gaining legal experience during this time in private practice. You eventually joined the office of of the Attorney General of Texas as Deputy Attorney General for Legal Strategy. In that role, you were involved in some of the office's most impactful litigation during the Biden administration. You fought to secure the border, to hold big tech accountable, to protect integrity at the ballot box, and to promote conservative social values. Today, you continue to serve Texas and your country as a member of Senator Cruz's staff. You're currently his chief of staff, and I think I won't offend my colleagues when I say that this is no easy job. This is particularly true because you continue to serve in the Marine Corps Reserve, where you actively drill with your unit and hold the rank of major. Your relentless work ethic and love of country are obvious, in short, for all three of you. These nominees before us have impressive careers and life stories, and I look forward to hearing from them today. Now, Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chairman Grassley. I'm going to make a brief opening statement here, and it relates to an issue which is very personal to me and to some members on the dais here. You are gathered in this room today for an important hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee. When you entered this complex, you were protected from the first step you took until this moment by the Capitol Police. These are men and women, some in uniform, some not, who are risking their lives to keep you and me safe. We should never, ever take that for granted. Those of us who were witness to the January 6th riot here in the Capitol have an experience we'll never forget. You've seen it. You can't miss the videos that have been played over and over again. As a result of that riot on January 6th, 4 police officers died, over 140 were assaulted, 1,600 people were arrested and convicted of crimes that day. For those of us who witnessed that occurrence, we know what was at the heart of it. It was an attempt by a mob to take control of the Capitol while we went through the constitutional exercise of counting electoral votes. It could have been worse, I guess, but to think that we had that happen in the United States Capitol is almost unthinkable. Imagine if you just heard the news that the House of Commons in Parliament in London had the door broken down and been overrun by a mob. You would have said to yourself, well, that's impossible. Not in London, not in England. For goodness sakes, it couldn't happen. It happened here, and we lived it. We ended up postponing the session of the Senate and the House to complete the constitutional duty until later in the evening, and we cleared these rioters out of the Capitol. I tell you that because the president recently announced that they weren't, in fact, guilty of any crime. They were being assaulted. Assaulted by whom? By the Capitol Police? By the National Guard that was here? That's an incredible statement, and it's on its face patently false and insulting to the men and women who protect us every single day. The bottom line is they're not stopping now that they've been released by President Trump's pardon. They're not stopping in their assault on the Capitol. They are now revisiting the Capitol, holding press conferences, harassing the men and women in uniform who protect us here every single day. This has got to come to an end. Democrats and Republicans have to stand up for the men and women who are risking their lives to keep us safe every day. And to say to these people who were pardoned by President Trump, please take your press conferences someplace else. We don't want them here in this Capitol. I think it's essential that we move in that direction and do it quickly. If we care for these men and women, it's time we speak out against this insulting, harassing conduct when it relates to Capitol policemen. Let me also say that I'm concerned, as I have been in the past, that we are seeing some transformation of law enforcement in this country that most people don't imagine. There was a time when the Federal Bureau of Investigation had one political appointee. For 50 years, the director was the only political appointee, given a 10-year term and expected to be at least mindful of his or her responsibility under the Constitution. The choice that was made by this committee and the Senate and ratified by the president has now put a new person in charge, Mr. Patel. Mr. Patel is proceeding with this effort to cleanse the ranks of the FBI of people who could shown any conduct in the past disloyal to Donald Trump. Honest to goodness. That's the first time in history we've gone through this. And to think that we're going to see a politically loyal ranking in the Federal Bureau of Investigations is an embarrassment to this nation. And it's hard to imagine that's happening. Sadly, we're seeing the same thing happening in the military. I don't think that's going to be good for this country at all. Those ranks should be apolitical, top to bottom. And I think we've got to work hard to make that happen. I'll be asking these witnesses what their responsibilities are and their reaction is to my statement. I yield.
Thank you. Now we go to Senator Lee for introduction.
Thank you so much, Chairman Grassley, and Ranking Member Durbin, and to all of my colleagues. It really is an honor to introduce Harmeet Dhillon, who's been nominated by President Trump to serve as the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division. If confirmed, she will serve every American with integrity and dedication. Harmeet is a fearless, longtime defender of constitutional rights with decades of litigation experience in civil rights advocacy. She's taken on some of the toughest cases, those that many others feared, standing up for the forgotten and holding power to account at every step. Her journey is one of perseverance. When Harmeet was 2 years old, her family emigrated from Punjab, India. By the age of 16, she was attending Dartmouth College, followed by law school at the University of Virginia, where she excelled in every way. After clerking on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, Harmeet gained invaluable experience at top law firms before soon going on to found her own incredibly successful practice. As the founder of the Dhillon Law Group, she's one of the nation's most respected attorneys, known for her unwavering commitment to justice, to free speech, civil rights, and election integrity. She litigates complex cases with precision and takes on powerful institutions with fearless dedication to her clients. Harmeet's championed government accountability, election integrity, and civil liberties. Her 3 years on the ACLU board demonstrate her dedication to principle over partisanship. Judges routinely commend her for her meticulous courtroom strategy. Colleagues admire her tenacity, and even adversaries can't help but admire her resolve and professionalism. Additionally, she's been a beacon of hope for a number of persecuted communities. As a true leader in the Sikh community, she's fought against post-9/11 discrimination and religious intolerance, ensuring that no one is denied their basic rights based on their faith, their background, their appearance. Harmeet's career embodies principle over politics, whether challenging unconstitutional laws, holding institutions accountable, or fighting for fair elections. She leads with integrity, fearlessness, and an unshakable belief in the rule of law and the importance of sticking with the Constitution. Harmeet Dhillon truly is an inspiration. She embodies the traits and the characteristics that are needed to help her succeed in this new role to which she's been appointed. Her career reflects conviction and the relentless, unapologetic pursuit of justice, no matter the cost. I urge every member of this committee to support her, and I look forward to voting for her enthusiastically on the Senate floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now we go to Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am proud to introduce to this committee my friend Aaron Reitz. Aaron has been nominated to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Policy at the Department of Justice. As Chairman Grassley observed, he is currently my Chief of Staff and has the virtually impossible job of keeping me out of trouble. In that regard, he has failed spectacularly. But it may not be possible to succeed, and so he is fleeing instead to the Department of Justice, where I have absolute confidence that he will diligently and vigilantly defend the rule of law at the Department of Justice. Before I get into Aaron's professional background, I want to note that he's here with his beautiful wife Meredith, with two of his four kids. So William and Caroline are both sitting behind their dad. And at home, Cecilia and Georgia, the younger ones, I'm sure are watching on TV unless they've fallen asleep or are doing something else that has distracted them. I want to take a minute just to walk through Aaron's career because he has excelled at everything he has put his hand to. He went to Texas A&M. He is a proud Aggie. His wife, Meredith, both he and Meredith are from San Antonio. She went to the University of Texas, so they are a divided household, and yet a happy one, and somehow they managed to work through the return to the A&M Texas football game that occurred this year. He went on to serve as an officer in the Marine Corps. He spent 5 years in active duty, deployed to the Helmand province of Afghanistan, where he was embedded with the Afghan National Army, leading logistical operations in one of the most dangerous regions of the world. To this day, he remains in the Marine Corps Reserve, where he holds the rank of major. He left active duty, went to the University of Texas at Austin, where he served as president of the Federalist Society and editor-in-chief of the Texas Review of Law and Politics. After that, he went into private practice and then clerked on the Texas Supreme Court. And then he returned to public service, going to the Texas Attorney General's office, where he was the Deputy Attorney General for Legal Strategy. And in that role, he was the driving force in many of the most consequential legal battles for my home state. For the last 2 years, he's been my chief of staff, and he's demonstrated a terrific ability to, number one, fight for my legislative agenda, including efforts to secure the border, to protect children from online harm, to grow our economy, and to bring justice to victims of violent crime. He also has earned the respect of his colleagues, the chiefs of staff of each of us around this dais. He has worked well both with Republicans and Democrats. He has brought people together behind a shared mission. And he now has been nominated to lead OLP at the Department of Justice. And I have every confidence that he will do that job with great distinction. And he will serve as a critical right hand to Attorney General Pam Bondi. And I'm proud to introduce Aaron, and I would encourage all of you to vote to confirm it.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's my privilege to introduce John Sauer, my friend, my former colleague, who has been nominated for the position of Solicitor General of the United States. I've known John for years and years now. He is a proud Missourian, going back many generations. John's career has already been incredibly distinguished. And the chairman mentioned some of his accolades. Let me just walk through a few of them, beginning with his education. He's a Bachelor of Science degree from Duke University. He was a Rhodes Scholar. He has an MA from the University of Notre Dame and a JD from Senator Cruz's law school. We'll try not to hold any of that against.
I apologize for that.
He after graduating and completing his education, he clerked for Judge Michael Ludick of the Fourth Circuit. And then for, as the chairman mentioned, for the great Antonin Scalia, who I continue to believe is the most influential Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the 20th century. And he served there with distinction. John then came back to his native St. Louis and was for 5 years a federal prosecutor, where he prosecuted violent crimes, white-collar crimes, and more. And then he briefly, in between that and joining the Missouri Attorney General's office, he founded a small litigation firm where he represented all manner of clients. And then our paths really began to intersect in 2017. I was elected Attorney General of the state of Missouri, and the Missouri Attorney General's office at that time did not have an office of the Solicitor General. And I thought it was important to create one, given the volume of appellate cases that we were facing. And I couldn't think of anybody better of all the attorneys that I'd had the privilege of working with than John. So I remember I went to John, and this may say something about my recruiting habits. You'll like this, Senator Kennedy. I went to John and we met at a Cracker Barrel. We sat down at a Cracker Barrel and over chicken fried steak, I said to him, John, you have the ability and the record to be Solicitor General of the United States, but would you at least consider coming to be Solicitor General of the state of Missouri? And to my great delight, and I think to the great benefit of the state of Missouri, he said yes, and served as my Solicitor General for 2 years, and also as my first assistant in the office, overseeing all of our criminal and civil litigation, including record numbers of criminal convictions, as well as an astounding win rate in the appellate courts. He's argued multiple times in the federal courts, the United States Supreme Court, of course, the Missouri courts, and handled all of that with the greatest of aplomb and professionalism. He went on to serve for a number of years, another 4 years, I believe, with my successor and now my good friend and colleague, Senator Schmidt, who will say more about that in a moment. But that reminds me, John, here's an opportunity to prepare for your first question. I'll just give it to you now so you can think about it. Which of the attorneys general on this dais was your favorite, and why is it me? So you can be thinking on that. John has served his state with the greatest of distinctions. He has served his country with the greatest of distinctions. I do not know a better lawyer in private practice, in public practice, federal prosecutor, name it, go down the line. I do not know a better lawyer in this country than John Sauer. I'm delighted to see him here today, and I'm delighted to support your nomination. I urge all of my colleagues to do the same.
Senator Schmidt.
Only because of seniority did you get to ask that question first. It was coming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor and privilege to introduce the smartest lawyer I've ever met, President Trump's nominee to be Solicitor General of the United States, and my former Solicitor General of Missouri, John Sauer. A born and raised Missourian, John is a man of deep personal faith, a fellow Catholic, a devoted husband to his wife, Anne, and father to his 5 children. As a young man, John ventured east to attend Duke, Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, Notre Dame, Harvard Law School, I mentioned it. After graduating magna cum laude from Harvard Law, John clerked for Judge Michael Ludig, as Senator Hawley mentioned, and the late, great Justice Antonin Scalia. After clerking for Justice Scalia, he worked at Cooper & Kirk, one of the nation's most influential law firms, was a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Missouri, and started his own law firm. During my time as Attorney General of Missouri, John was my Solicitor General. As Solicitor General of Missouri, John's performance was nothing short of exemplary. He demonstrated the ability to win on behalf of the American people. John is a home run choice to be our nation's Solicitor General. John possesses a very rare combination of brilliance, unparalleled work ethic, and humility. I don't know of many people who combine all 3 of those traits, but John certainly does. As my Solicitor General, he defended the God-given rights of not just Missourians, but of all Americans, litigating numerous cases during the COVID era, helping the office beat back the authoritarian forces who were seeking to shut down the United States of America, impose mass mandates on young children, and make Americans choose whether to take a vaccine or their livelihoods. He also helped hold the People's Republic of China accountable for their actions during COVID-19. He helped the office take on big tech giants who, in an unholy alliance with the Biden administration, colluded to censor and silence dissent in our country. Missouri versus Biden, later Murphy versus Missouri, stands as one of the most important First Amendment cases in our nation's history. Together, we brought the student loan debt forgiveness case and won at the Supreme Court. He has defended the unborn, the rule of law, our Constitution, and for the last few years has been President Trump's legal champion, while the president defended himself from the most weaponized and politicized prosecutorial onslaughts in American history. So now, and once again, he is called to venture back east, this time by President Trump, to be our Solicitor General of the United States. As Solicitor General, John will be the nation's chief courtroom advocate for the high stakes, high profile cases that will arise over the years to come in that courtroom. He will be the man in the legal arena, arguing before the Supreme Court on the most important cases that come before it. He will be the people's and the Constitution's legal champion. His professional track record demonstrates the skill and aptitude to win these most important cases. On a personal note, I can think of no one I trust more to do the right thing every single time. He is a man of great virtue. I can personally attest to his prudence, fortitude, and temperance as well. He is honest, hardworking, and as I said earlier, quite simply, the smartest lawyer I've ever known. I can think of no one better suited to fight for justice on behalf of the people of the United States in the biggest courtroom in the country. I urge my colleagues to support his nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now, would you please, 3 of you, stand and take this oath? Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Let the record show that they all responded. Now be seated, please, and then you can give your opening statements, Mr. Sauer, Mr. Reitz, and Ms. Dhillon, and you have an opportunity to introduce family and friends if you want to. Please go ahead, Mr. Sauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Senators Hawley and Schmidt, for those kind introductions, which I'm not sure I fully deserve. Chairman Grassley and Ranking Member Durbin, thank you for the opportunity to address this committee. Thank you to the committee members for taking the time to meet with me and to discuss the thoughts and concerns about the challenges facing our nation. If I'm confirmed, I will look forward to working together with you in Attorney General Bondi's administration to address these challenges. Today, I have so many other people to thank. First and foremost, I offer my humble thanks to President Trump for this nomination and the great vote of confidence that it reflects. This nomination and the privilege of representing President Trump over the past 2 years have been the greatest honors of my professional life. Next, I express my deep gratitude to my former bosses, Senator Hawley and Senator Schmidt, both of whom I love and adore equally, for giving me the opportunity to serve as the Solicitor General of the great state of Missouri. Senators, your leadership and mentorship in that office has meant the world to me. In addition, I thank my family and friends, many present here today, for their unswerving love and support throughout this process. Without that support, I could never have arrived at this moment today. Indeed, as I sit here today, I marvel at how the American dream could take a kid from the Midwestern heartland and give him the opportunity to sit before this august committee and address some of the greatest legal challenges facing our nation. In my legal career, I have been blessed with a long string of amazing opportunities. Each of these drove home to me in a unique way the importance of fidelity to the Constitution and to the rule of law. For example, as the chairman mentioned, shortly after law school, I had the privilege of clerking for Justice Antonin Scalia of the United States Supreme Court. Justice Scalia was one of the greatest defenders of the Constitution and the rule of law in our nation's history, and his example has inspired my entire career. His insistence on fidelity to the original public meaning of the Constitution and the plain and ordinary meaning of statutes have provided the guideposts to my approach to legal analysis ever since. Not long after that, I received the opportunity to serve in the U.S. Department of Justice as an assistant U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Missouri, where I prosecuted violent crimes and white-collar crimes, among other matters. In this role, I was inspired by the Department of Justice's commitment to the principle of equal justice under law. I'll always remember the presentation I received from a gray-haired veteran of the department, explaining the motto on DOJ's seal, Qui pro domina justitia sequitur, those who sue on behalf of the Lady Justice. A few years later, I was blessed with the opportunity to serve as the Solicitor General of the greatest state in the Union, Missouri, under the leadership of two great public servants. In this role, I was called upon to resist the overreaches of the federal government that trampled the fundamental rights of ordinary American citizens. I began to see, as our founders did, that fidelity to the Constitution and the rule of law require constant vigilance and struggle. Then, during the most recent 2 years, I've had the great honor to represent President Trump in fighting back against the politically motivated prosecutions and lawfare campaigns against him. To me, these cases reflected a profound and dangerous perversion of the ideals of the Department of Justice, where I had proudly served as a young prosecutor. They manifested the weaponization of the federal government at its worst in an unconstitutional attempt to interfere with the 2024 presidential election by trying to prosecute and imprison the sitting president's main political opponent. I learned that fighting for the Constitution and the rule of law requires courage, perseverance, and sacrifice. Fortunately, that lawfare campaign failed, and President Trump was reelected in a historic landslide. In his inaugural address, President Trump promised that the scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end, and never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents. Instead, President Trump pledged that we will restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. If I'm confirmed by the Senate, I pledge to work with Attorney General Bondi and her administration to support and achieve President Trump's vision of fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reitz.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley and Ranking Member Durbin, for convening this hearing and for providing my fellow nominees and me the opportunity to participate in the Senate's essential and time-honored advice and consent role under the Constitution. The predominant feeling I have sitting here today is gratitude. And because of that, I want to say thank you to several people. Thank you to each of the individual members of this committee, both Republican and Democrat, as well as their staffs, for taking time to visit with me over the past couple of weeks. As I hope I made clear during those meetings, it's my goal to earn your support. Thank you to my boss, Senator Cruz, not only for your very kind introduction, but for your past 2 years of mentorship while I've served as your chief of staff. You've shown me not only how to be a fierce defender of the Constitution and the rule of law, but also how to work with a wide diversity of people with different perspectives on both sides of the aisle to serve the American people. Thank you to my family for supporting me and having my back. Today, we have with us my wife of 16 years, Meredith. We've known each other since we were 12, and I was reminded while preparing the paperwork for this hearing how much we've been through together. Moves, careers, deployments, kids, one public service pay cut after another, and now this new adventure, a hopeful opportunity to serve at the Justice Department. I love and appreciate you. We also have 2 of our 4 children here, William, my oldest, who was born while I was in Afghanistan, and his younger sister, Caroline. Back at home in Texas are our 2 littler ones, Cecilia and Georgia, who Meredith and I decided would be just a bit too squirmy for a Judiciary Committee hearing. Also at home are my parents, Donna and Paul. My father is undergoing surgery on Friday for kidney cancer, and we lift him up in prayer. Thank you to those who have had an outsized influence in developing me professionally over the years. My 1st Marine Corps Battalion Commander Bill Vivian and Company Commander Isaac Moore, Law School Deans Ward Farnsworth and Bobby Chesney, now Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court Jimmy Blacklock, who I clerked for, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and of course, Senator Cruz. Thank you to Attorney General Pam Bondi for answering the call to serve as our nation's Attorney General. She's been in office for only a few weeks, and yet is already making historic strides to restore law and order and to increase the American people's confidence in our justice system. I am honored to be considered to serve under her. Lastly, and most of all, thank you to President Trump for entrusting me to lead the Office of Legal Policy. President Trump cast a vision for accountability, transparency, integrity, and devotion to the Constitution that inspired millions of Americans to overwhelmingly vote him into the White House. I look forward to doing my small part to carry out that vision at OLP under his and Attorney General Bondi's leadership. The Office of Legal Policy has a broad mission. It plays an important role in advising the Attorney General on legal policy, coordinating the department's regulatory review process, and assisting the White House and Senate with judicial nominees. In each of these missions, I commit to the Senate the following. With respect to legal policy, you can expect me to pursue the President's and the Attorney General's agenda with energy, impartiality, independent thinking, and faithfulness to the Constitution and all federal laws. With respect to regulatory law, you can expect me to closely coordinate with executive branch rulemaking authorities to ensure the department is effectively and efficiently pursuing justice for all. And with respect to judges, you can expect me to faithfully assist the President identify, vet, and process his judicial nominees. This necessarily means working collaboratively with the Judiciary Committee, as well as individual home state senators. Lastly, in all things, the Senate, the President, and the American people have my absolute commitment to excellence, fairness, integrity, blind justice, the observance of the best legal practices, and adherence to the highest standards of conduct and ethics. Thank you again to the committee for considering my nomination. I look forward to answering your questions and hopefully earning your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reitz. Now, Mrs. Dhillon.
Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of the Judiciary Committee, I would like to thank all of you for this opportunity to respond to your questions. And thank you to Senator Lee for his very kind introduction of me. I'm grateful for the time that many committee members have taken to meet or speak with me before this hearing. and I have valued hearing their concerns and ideas about the Civil Rights Division. I thank President Trump for nominating me to this important position. He knows all too well how the Department of Justice may be weaponized for the wrong ends, for political persecution, for payback, for punishing protected speech and ideas. As his lawyer for several years, I too am keenly aware of how quickly justice may become unjust. I also want to thank Attorney General Pam Bondi for her inspiring leadership and her trust in me. I am deeply honored to be joined by members of my immediate family here today. My mother, Harminder, my brother, Mandeep Singh Dhillon, and two of his children, Theg Zorawar Singh and Hazuri Kaur Dhillon, and other dear, near, and near family members. With me in spirit, as well as my husband, Sarjeet, who passed away last summer and who supported me in every way. Many friends have come from around the country to support me as well, and I'm so grateful. I owe everything I have in this world to God and to my family. My parents brought Mandeep and I to the Bronx, New York, where Dad finished his medical residency, then to rural Smithfield, North Carolina, where his simple goal was to raise his family in a small town with traditional values, practice orthopedics, play a little tennis, and enjoy the American dream. When we moved to Smithfield in 1975, there was a sign on the highway as you entered town that said, "The United Klans of America welcome visitors to Smithfield." My parents didn't know what the Klan was when they moved to Smithfield. We did find out. Thankfully, the anachronistic and despicable sign came down in 1977, and the Klan didn't affect me directly. But I was bullied as a child for my long braids, my funny name, my unusual faith, and it wasn't the easiest thing to be a family of turban-wearing Sikhs in the rural South in the 1970s. What I learned from my parents was that in America, anybody could be anything with hard work and determination. I am before you today because of these life experiences. My faith teaches me that it is a duty to stand up for the rights of the defenseless. Throughout my 32-year legal career, I have honored this teaching through my legal work. In law school, I've been an advocate for victims of domestic violence, work I continued for over a decade in private practice. I've advocated in the courts for asylum seekers facing religious and political persecution. My clients have included Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and Christians. This work has taught me deep compassion for the oppressed, as well as a daily appreciation for the liberty that Americans often take for granted. I was a lawyer in private practice in Silicon Valley when the 9/11 terrorist attacks struck. From handling intellectual property litigation, I suddenly pivoted to writing legal memos to help South Asians and Arab Americans understand their legal rights in the face of wholesale attacks from fellow Americans, ranging from murders and assaults on Sikh gas station owners and taxi drivers to casual slurs shouted at my brother Mandeep at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, calling him Osama and telling him to go back to his country. This is our country, senators, and it is the greatest country on God's earth. Today, the promise of equal opportunity that my family taught me, which I fought for my entire career in the courtroom, is being robbed from millions of Americans in the workplace by dangerous and oppressive ideology enabled by corrosive government dictates. Young girls and women are seeing their dreams of hard-fought equal access to sports opportunities, of even basic privacy, modesty, and dignity in women's private spaces being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. Generations of young people have been denied educational opportunities because of their immutable characteristics, instead of merit, even in the face of Supreme Court precedent that clearly bans such admissions policies. And our elections are consistently at risk of becoming ad hoc coronations where government officials in power put a thumb on the scale to achieve preferred outcomes. Our democracy is the lifeblood of our republic. Insecurity in this process breeds mistrust. Mistrust breeds anxiety and anarchy. We must remain forever vigilant in ensuring the results of the ballot box reflect the will of the people, not the preferences of the elites. It's 2025 in America. President Trump was just elected with a historic amount of support from Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Americans without college degrees. There is no greater time to be alive and to be an American than today. If I am honored to be confirmed as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, this is my promise, Senators. I will bring my decades of experience as an attorney fighting for the rights of the defenseless to work every day. I will start every analysis with the Constitution. I will respect the words of statutes and the teachings of the courts, even if I disagree with them, though I will act within the law to challenge legal rulings I believe are wrong or statutes I believe are unconstitutional. What I will never do is use the DOJ Civil Rights Division as a partisan tool to push a political agenda. The Department of Justice stands for justice for all Americans. My parents crossed true oceans to bring me as a small child to America. We as a family are Americans by choice, and I can think of no higher honor as a lawyer than to be charged with defending and advancing the civil rights of all American citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 5-minute rounds of questions. I'll start and then go to Senator Durbin. I want to apologize to the three of you because when I'm done asking my questions, other members will take over chairing because I have to go to the Agriculture Committee. So I'm going to start with Mr. Reitz. You were being a Marine in the major in the Marines and your service in Afghanistan. How do you think your military service has informed your legal career, and what lessons will you take from the Marine Corps to your role as at DOJ?
Well, thank you for that question, Chairman Grassley. I first raised my hand and swore an oath to defend the Constitution when I was 22 years old. I take that oath deadly seriously. That not only structures my philosophy of how I would approach my job at the Justice Department, but that commitment also shapes how I work and how I execute that mission with integrity, with excellence, with high standards, morals, and treating everybody with dignity the way that they deserve to be treated. And so not only do I bring a commitment to the U.S. Constitution, but I also bring a way of acting that I think adheres to the best that our nation has to offer.
Yeah. Mr. Sauers, you clerked for Justice Scalia, a famous champion of interpreting doctrine of originalism, and throughout his career promoting the concept of federalism. What was your most important lesson that you learned from Justice Scalia?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. It would be very hard to reduce it to just one, but I would, in response to your question, echo the personal characteristics of Justice Scalia that I emphasized when I had the privilege of giving a eulogy for him in 2016 after his death. Not just his titanic influence on the development of law in the United States and advancing the doctrines of textualism and originalism, but in my experience, he exemplified the characteristics of a teacher and mentor, a man of great personal devotion, a man of great personal courage, and a person of deep humility. And I think you see the humility of Justice Scalia reflected in his attraction to the legal theories that he espoused, which are ultimately humble legal theories, the legal theories of limited role of courts in the interpretation of congressional statutes and the Constitution.
Ms. Dhillon, you'll have to protect the civil rights of all Americans under diversity, equity, and inclusion. The previous administration imposed a nationwide regime that discriminated against some people. The Civil Rights Division completely failed to enforce our nation's civil rights laws. So how will you approach enforcing our civil rights laws different from the previous administration?
Chairman Grassley, thank you for that question. The Civil Rights Division has 11 sections, and each of them is charged with an important duty under the Constitution and the statutes, of course. So my approach is going to be to meet with the section heads in each of those sections, understand the present work that they are doing, and then assessing the extent to which that work is consistent with my view of the civil rights statutes and the priorities of the Department of Justice. And I think the President and Attorney General Bondi have made clear that diversity, equity, inclusion, as it has been applied to use racial quotas to deny people equal access to education, employment, even potentially housing and other aspects of civil life that are covered by the civil rights statutes, are inappropriate. And so we'll certainly be taking a close look at all of those and enforcing the law equally in favor of all Americans.
Would you approach Title VII discrimination civil rights laws and use it against companies that discriminate on the basis of race?
Senator, If the facts support such a prosecution or a civil litigation, I certainly would do that. It is inappropriate in my view, and I think Title VII's language is clear that racial discrimination is inappropriate in hiring. And so that is certainly a priority that I would undertake, and one that I've undertaken in private practice as well.
The same question as it relates to Title VI against universities that receive federal funds, but who discriminate on the basis of race?
Senator, we have a problem throughout the United States, not just on the basis of race in universities, but also religion. We've seen anti-Semitism sweep the nation, and it is very problematic that many people of the Jewish faith are barred by professors and fellow students from access to the classroom. So yes, in addition to race, I would see religious discrimination and other forms of discrimination on campuses as an appropriate target for the Civil Rights Division.
Thanks to all three of you. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to each of you, your family and friends, for this historic opportunity. Mrs. Dhillon, I thank you for coming by the office. Though we may not agree on many issues, I certainly respected the exchange. And I want to say for the record, I'm still proud of the fact that the Sikh community came to me after 9/11 and asked me to introduce a resolution which said that there should not be any discrimination against those who follow your religion as a result of 9/11. It passed on a bipartisan basis. George W. Bush, as president, I think showed real leadership on that and many other issues. I also held a hearing in this committee when we had the terrible incident at the Gadwala in Wisconsin, where a white supremacist killed innocent people of the Sikh community. We had a hearing on that and packed the room with those who were interested in making sure that that never happens again. I'd like to go to specific questions, if I can, of the nominees. Mr. Reitz, have you ever expressed support for the idea that an elected official should defy a federal court order?
Thank you, Ranking Member Durbin. I'm not aware of any instances at this time of having made such an assertion.
So let me remind you of a statement that you made. On March 30th, 2020, U.S. District Judge Lee Yackel, a George W. Bush appointee, temporarily blocked Texas from closing abortion clinics as a response to the state's COVID-19 outbreak. You commented on this and wrote, looking for some Andrew Jackson level leadership on this one. Judge Yackel has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. This was an obvious reference to the fictitious story about language supposedly used by Andrew Jackson and suggesting he would defy a Supreme Court ruling in Worcester versus Georgia. Do you stand by your tweet?
Thank you for reminding me of this tweet, Ranking Member Durbin. What this tweet reflects is a conservative view of Article 3 and the role of courts and their ability to bind parties that are not litigants to the case before it, which is a mainstream view within jurisprudential debates, but captured in 140 characters on a tweet.
Bottom line, should an elected official be allowed to defy a federal court order?
It would be too case specific for me to make a blanket statement about that, Ranking Member Durbin.
So you're saying that a legal court order from a federal court should not be followed under some circumstances? What would those circumstances be?
Ranking Member Durbin, what I'm saying is that there are some instances in which a public official is lawfully bound by the holding of a particular court, in which case that official would in fact lawfully be required to be bound by it. I can't speak, though, Ranking Member Durbin, for all instances in which that dynamic may or may not be at play given a certain lawsuit.
That's an incredible statement by someone who wants to be part of the Department of Justice. Mr. Sauer, what's your take on this?
Ranking Member Durbin, thank you for the question. Like Mr. Reitz, I don't want to speak to hypotheticals, especially not hypotheticals that might come before me in an official capacity if I were confirmed by the Senate. Generally, if there's a direct court order that binds a federal or state official, they should follow it.
Why do you say generally? Give me an exception that would be acceptable to you.
I suppose if as I sit here, I can't think of a hypothetical one way or the other. I suppose one could imagine hypotheticals in, extreme cases like, the Korematsu decision, the Dred Scott decision where people
Let's go back to Korematsu. Describe for me that circumstance that you think relieved an official from obeying a court order.
Well, I believe there was a court order there that upheld, which has now been, I think, correctly repudiated by virtually everyone, a court order that upheld the internment of Japanese civilians in internment camps during.
As bad as it was, that court order was followed for years, was it not?
And I just wonder whether some historians might think we'd be better off if it hadn't been followed.
But once we
Again, I don't want to get into.
I want to get into it because I think it goes to the heart of the question of the future constitutional challenge we face as a nation. There's a great fear among many people, academics and people in the legal profession, as to whether or not this president would defy a court order, which basically would put him above the law, at least in his own eyes. And I want to know what circumstances Mr. Reitz and Mr. Sauer believe justify that conclusion.
And you can answer that quickly. We've run out of time.
Very quickly, I've represented President Trump for the better part of 2 years, and I just think that that's not a plausible scenario.
You say the same, Mr. Reitz?
You've run out of time, Ranking Member. Thank you. Senator Hawley.
I think maybe I've misunderstood this last line of questioning. I thought it sounded to me like my friend Senator Durbin was defending the Korematsu decision, which I think is one of the worst and most abhorrent decisions in the history of the United States. So I just want to be clear on this. Let me give you all a chance to weigh in on this. When we have a decision that is absolutely morally abhorrent, Korematsu, Dred Scott, we can go down the line. Should officials who disagree with a morally abhorrent decision just blindly follow it, or do they register their disagreements? I suppose if they have to, they resign and protest. I mean, there's a system for this. There's a pattern for this. But is the United States of America better off if our public officials, in the face of grievous moral wrong, say and do nothing? Mr. Sauer?
I strongly agree, Senator Hawley, with your reaction to that. And the only point I was trying to make in my exchange with the ranking member was it's hard to make a very blanket, sweeping statement about something without being presented with the facts and the law that apply to that particular scenario. So those historical examples, I think, are designed to illustrate the difficulty of doing that.
Mr. Reitz, you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you for your background and also for teeing up that question. I stand by my earlier comments, which is to say that there is no hard and fast rule about whether in every instance a public official is bound by a court decision. There are some instances in which he or she may lawfully be bound, and other instances in which he or she may not lawfully be bound.
Well, certainly I know that everybody sitting on this panel in front of me is a firm believer in the rule of law. It just seems that to me, we can multiply these instances. The Fugitive Slave Act, for example. And we had numerous judges and other public officials when the Supreme Court said that the fugitive slave law, an absolutely abhorrent law, had to be enforced in the North. You had multiple judges who said, I can in good conscience enforce this. Many of them then resigned. The United States might be a better place if more of them had done so and had taken a stand firmly against such injustice. So I can't believe that it's the position of anybody on this committee that in the face of decisions like Korematsu and Dred Scott and the Fugitive Slave Act that we should say to people, oh, just grin and bear it. Don't say anything. Enforce the law, for heaven's sake. I mean, good heavens. Ms. Dhillon, let me ask you. You spoke very movingly about religious liberty, and it made me think of that line that America didn't invent religious liberty invented America. And your family's story is certainly a testament to that. I also am mindful of the fact that in the last 4 years, we have seen unprecedented attacks on religious liberty in this country, absolutely abhorrent attacks on people of faith. Just to take one example, after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, 100 pregnancy care centers, more than that, were vandalized, criminally assaulted, firebombed. Over 300 churches, many of them Catholic churches, were targeted in the same manner. The Biden Justice Department did nothing to defend these institutions. They let them twists in the wind. They allowed the violence to go on virtually unchecked. And indeed, members of this body encouraged this kind of violence with outrageous, irresponsible rhetoric on the floor of the United States Senate and on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. My question to you is, will you commit to stopping the disparate treatment of Americans on the basis of religious faith that we have seen in the last 4 years? Will you make sure that people of faith are protected in the religious expression of their most deeply held beliefs?
Oh, thank you for that question, Senator Hawley. I believe my career and the disclosures made to the Senate would back up the fact that my entire career in 32 years has included religious liberty litigation on the side of people of faith, of minority and majority faiths. And I'm very proud of that. And I've won cases at the United States Supreme Court defending people of faith from government tyranny and obstruction. And so I would absolutely be committed as a top priority in the Civil Rights Division, if confirmed, to defending people of faith equally.
Very good. And will you investigate and, where it's warranted, prosecute those who carry out attacks on pregnancy care centers, places of worship, those who, with religious or maybe it's anti-religious motivation, target people of faith in their houses of worship and other places where, frankly, they're quite vulnerable?
Absolutely, Senator. I don't think there's any question about that.
Good. Let me ask you about anti-Semitism on America's campuses. You referenced this, I think, in your opening statement. Since October 7th of 2023, we've seen the most horrific explosion of anti-Semitic violence. Just yesterday, I met in my office with a young man, a student at DePaul University, an ROTC member. He's also Jewish. He's a Jewish American. His arm was in a sling because he had been physically assaulted on his campus. What was his offense? He had been tabling in support of the state of Israel. Will you commit to vigorously enforcing, Ms. Dhillon, Title VI violations related to anti-Semitism to make sure that we root out this scourge on America's campuses?
If you want to briefly
Absolutely, Senator. I would certainly commit to that.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Coons.
Mr. Sauer, thank you for your service as a federal prosecutor, and to the people of Missouri. Mr. Reitz, for your service to this body, to my colleague, Senator Cruz, and your military service to our nation. And Ms. Dhillon, I appreciate your willingness to step forward and raise your hand to serve. You are all seeking critical leadership positions in a Department of Justice that is reeling and questioning the direction that it's being taken. Career prosecutors were fired for working on cases that President Trump did not approve of or like. Senior DOJ leaders in national security posts have been reassigned. And at the Southern District of New York and in the Public Integrity Unit, a half dozen prosecutors resigned earlier this month rather than carry out what they believe to be unlawful or unethical orders in the Eric Adams case. Ms. Dhillon, if President Trump were to ask you to do something that you believed was either illegal or unconstitutional, what would you do?
Thank you for that question, Senator Coons. First of all, I have represented President Trump for 4 years in numerous different cases, and I currently represent him as a private attorney. And in all of those years, in multiple cases, in multiple jurisdictions, the president has never asked me to do anything that I found to be objectionable, immoral, unlawful, or illegal. And so I really can't fathom the circumstance that you're describing. It would really be hypothetical to me.
As I just conveyed, I don't think it's a hypothetical. You've got folks in the Public Integrity Unit and the Southern District resigning over what they believe to be an unethical and inappropriate order. And I put that exact question to your predecessor in the first Trump administration, Eric Dreiband, his first AAG for civil rights. He didn't call it hypothetical. He answered directly. He said every Department of Justice attorney swears an oath to execute and faithfully execute and defend the Constitution and laws, and it would therefore be appropriate to refuse to follow a directive of the president if illegal or unconstitutional. Mr. Dreiband, in exactly the same situation, answered the question, is there any reason you can't?
Well, Mr. Dreiband didn't have 4 years of representing President Trump as his lawyer, and so I would give him the grace of not knowing for that experience that I've had. And so I think that it is a hypothetical to me. And so I respectfully...
It may be to you, but sadly it is not to currently serving members of the Department of Justice. If I might, Mr. Reitz, in the exchange that was just held both between Senator Durbin and Senator Hawley and yourself, dozens of President Trump's executive orders have been blocked by federal courts in recent weeks, federal district courts, and a number have been reviewed on appeal. To your knowledge, has the administration complied with these federal court orders?
Thank you, Senator Coons. I have not been following the procedural posture of those cases very closely. Of course, I intend to do so should I be confirmed once I'm in the Justice Department.
You'll be centrally involved in those decisions. And part of what my colleague was trying to focus on was the tweet that you apparently posted in response to a decision you didn't like. The tweet said, looking for some Andrew Jackson level leadership on this one. Judge Yackel has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. My colleague from Missouri suggested that somehow Senator Durbin was standing up for the Korematsu decision or standing up for the Dred Scott decision. And I think buried in what he said and in what my colleague said is clarity. What are the avenues appropriately available to a litigant, which can include the president or a department secretary? What are the avenues available to properly challenge a duly issued federal circuit or district court order? And is it ever proper to simply refuse to obey that order?
Thank you, Senator Coons. I'll answer your second question first, which is what I referenced earlier. There is no hard and fast rule in all instances in which a litigant must comply with all or some or various parts of a judicial decision. It is so fact, law, and case specific that one cannot speak generally.
In your view, do litigants before a federal court get to choose whether or not to obey a federal court order? They can appeal it, they can speak out against it, they can question it, but can they refuse? Could the President of the United States refuse, as a litigant before a federal court, refuse to follow that order, which was the key implication of your tweet?
So generally speaking, Senator Coons, parties to a case are bound by a lawful court holding from that court. And as you rightly pointed out, Senator Coons, there are many different avenues to right a perceived wrong: appeals, rehearings, various motions, etc. You're familiar with them.
I hope you will be clear in your service, since I recognize I'm nearing the end of my time. Thank you for that answer. I think all of us are holding our breath to see whether or not President Trump and those who will be advising him correctly understand what is a foundational principle of the rule of law.
Thank you, Senator.
A litigant
Coons, for your
before a
brevity.
federal court may
Appreciate
appeal,
that.
may question, may challenge, but may not ignore a
Thank you, Senator
district court
Coons.
order.
We'll move to Senator Blackburn for her questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and congratulations to each of you. We are, we're really pleased that your families are here, that you have this nomination, and we're so looking forward to having you serve President Trump and the American people in your position. So congratulations to you. Ms. Dhillon, I want to come to you first. In Tennessee, we follow the motto, let's make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. And it is important for each person to know that their vote is counted, and that that the process is going to be a process that is true, transparent, and honest. And so our counties have been busy cleaning up voter rolls, and it's why Tennessee has been ranked #1 in the country for election integrity. And I know that you're going to follow those same premises at the Department of Justice. So I would like for you to talk about what you can do at the Civil Rights Division to make certain that we restore election integrity.
Well, thank you for that question, Senator Blackburn. And I really appreciate how Tennessee has taken a lead in cleaning up the voter rolls. Federal law provides under the National Voter Registration Act that states do maintain their voter rolls in an up-to-date way, but in fact, most states are woefully behind in doing so, which creates confusion and distress among citizens who are concerned that their votes are not being equally cast. I think there are limited enforcement mechanisms for the Department of Justice to necessarily take the lead on this particular issue, but there have been many cases in which private organizations or state parties have been granted standing to challenge, and the Department of Justice has the opportunity in those cases where the facts have been developed to come in and take a position as well. And the position, in my opinion, of the Department of Justice should be 100% in favor of clean voter rolls. And now many states have evolved excellent methods for doing that in a fair way, giving citizens notice, giving them notice in multiple election cycles. And so I think there are many ways that states can stay up to date like Tennessee has done.
Thank you for that. Mr. Sauer, I want to come to you, and I appreciated the opportunity to visit with you prior to the hearing. I want to drill down on one comment you made, justice without fear or favor. And I appreciated that because so many people that have reached out to us, members of this committee, have noted that it seemed we were in a season under the last administration where there were 2 tiers of justice and 2 tiers of access and 2 tiers of treatment. And the American people have spoken against this loudly, and they want equal justice for all. So I would like for you to comment on what you mean and how that concept, justice without fear or favor, is essential to your role as the Solicitor General.
Thank you very much for the question, Senator. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet and speak with you. I greatly appreciated that opportunity. I greatly appreciate the question as well, because I think that you've asked about something that goes to the heart of the role of the Department of Justice. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the principle of equal justice under law, which is the same as justice without fear or favor, is central to the Department of Justice's mission. Senator Hawley, I think, referred to some recent historical examples of situations where that was not fully upheld in the most recent administration. In my opening statement, I referred to what to me obviously are the most compelling and really astonishing experiences that I have had with respect to that. That really arose, certainly that involved many of the cases that I had the privilege of litigating under the leadership of Senator Schmidt, but in it when he was Attorney General of Missouri, but also representing President Trump in the recent lawfare and weaponized prosecutions that he experienced. So we have a number of unfortunate examples in our recent history in the Department of Justice, and that's why what was really kind of a ringing call to me in President Trump's inaugural address was his statements that I quoted about restoring equal justice under law and the constitutional rule of law.
Thank you. Mr. Reitz, in your role over at DOJ, you're going to be responsible for initiating policy initiatives. And this is something important to addressing violent crime that is just raging across the country. And I want to get from you in writing what you can do. The previous Trump administration had programs like Operation Legend, which was very effective in Memphis, Tennessee. And I know my time has expired, but if you'll submit that one to me in writing.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Thank you for respecting that time. We're going to hear from Senator Hirono now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I asked the following 2 initial questions of all nominees before any of my committees, so I will ask you, starting with Mr. Sauer, and we'll just go right down the line. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
No.
No, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
No, Senator.
I have not, Senator.
I would like to state with regard to Mr. Reitz that, for the record, that in 2023, during impeachment proceedings against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, a Texas Ranger testified that there were, quote, many complaints of sexual harassment by female employees, end quote, about Mr. Reitz when he worked in the Texas Attorney General's office. And I will have further questions for the record regarding these complaints. For Ms. Dhillon, relating to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, I think that your position is that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act requires actual discrimination and basically discriminatory intent before it will be deemed unconstitutional under Section 2. Is that correct? Is that your view of Section 2 Voting Rights Act?
I would say, to generalize, yes, it is.
So that means that unless there's discriminatory intent, unless say state legislature says, yes, we are about to enact legislation that will discriminate against a group, you do not think that Section 2 applies?
I disagree with your characterization, Senator. There are many ways to prove intent other than a blanket statement from a state legislature. And
Ms. Rice, let me mention that under President Trump's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, they've filed a number of lawsuits under Section 2. For example, a law prohibiting civil groups from providing food or water to people who are standing in line to vote. There was no discriminatory intent. Would you have filed that lawsuit against that law?
Senator, I haven't had the opportunity to study all of the facts underlying those prosecutions by the Biden Department of Justice.
Well, excuse me, you know what, Merrick Garland also filed a lawsuit under Section 2, state law limiting counties' use of absentee ballot drop boxes. So there are a number of these kinds of voting rights laws that the states enacted after Shelby County, and in fact, 13 states very immediately passed all kinds of laws that made it a lot tougher to vote. So I'm just wondering, how are you going to decide which ones to go after? I mean, these obviously have the effect of discrimination against certain groups, making it harder for them to vote. How would you decide which of these kinds of voting rights laws enacted by states without, the obvious smoking gun?
Well, Senator, I have to disagree with the premise of your question that all of these measures that Georgia and other states took to improve confidence of all citizens in voting, in fact, had any form of discriminatory impact.
Excuse me, I only have a minute. I mean, obviously, there is disagreement. That is the crux, isn't it, as to whether or not these laws actually have an anti-discriminatory effect. And you obviously do not think so. For Mr. Reitz, you stated in one of your many tweets, in fact, there are thousands of tweets that you deleted before your nomination, and we could go over some of them. They're quite astounding, but one of them said, birthright citizenship is not a thing. Is birthright citizenship in the Constitution? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Thank you, Senator Hirono. I think that there are reasonable debates to be had about the meaning and application and scope of what is commonly called birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment.
Well, actually, since it's been 130 years where this particular provision has been deemed to confer birthright citizenship, and not in the way that President Trump views it, and apparently not you. So when we start talking about, the rule of law and that you all would follow the rule of law, I do wonder what constitutes rule of law in your mind, because after President Trump issued all of his executive orders, some 70 lawsuits have been filed challenging the legality of his executive orders. So legality is often in the minds and eyes of the beholder. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. We'll turn to Senator Britt.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just want to say congratulations to each and every one of you for being nominated, and to your families. I know that this is a big moment and you're really proud of the work that they've done to get here, and what an honor it is. I think all of us up here know that when you serve, it's not just you, it's your entire family that does. And so we say thank you. I especially want to say something to Mr. Reitz. It has been an honor and privilege to get to work with you over the last 2 years. I am not only grateful for your service to this nation and the U.S. Marine Corps, but what I have seen you do for Senator Cruz firsthand. As a former chief myself, I know what it takes to make it all work and to make sure that your boss and your state and the nation are in the best place possible. You have done that in a manner that is second to none. And I am excited to see each and every one of you serve our nation at a higher level. So thank you. I'm going to start with Mrs. Dhillon. So to follow up on Senator Blackburn's comments, Alabama feels strongly about making sure that every single person has access to vote. that we make that easier, whether that's providing free voter ID, whether that's coming to your house to allow you to register. We want to make sure that every citizen does that. We also want to make sure that that vote is protected. Part of the work of the Civil Rights Division relates to protecting that right to vote. In my view, it's an important part of protecting the right of American citizens to vote, and it's to ensure that the votes aren't diluted by those who have actually no right to vote. I know you've done some work on this issue during your time in private practice, and it's an issue that I've also worked to address here in Congress. During this Congress, I'll be reintroducing once again the Citizens Ballot Protection Act, which amends federal law to explicitly allow states to put in place proof of citizenship, to require that for federal mail-in voter registration forms and any state mail voter registration forms that they might develop. I think many people across the nation would be shocked to know that states are currently hamstrung when it comes to requiring proof of citizenship as part of certain voter registration processes. It's common sense to ensure that only American citizens are registering to vote in our elections. Based on your experience, can you explain why it's important and necessary to take steps to ensure that non-citizens are not voting in our election, and the role that you think DOJ, and in particular the Civil Rights Division, can or should play in ensuring the votes of American citizens are not diluted?
Thank you for your question, Senator Britt. And I actually want to particularly thank you for introducing the legislation you just described, because while the NVRA doesn't itself, of course, bar states from requiring proof of citizenship, courts have done that and laid that prohibition that, in fact, was a subject of some conversations I had with some of your fellow senators while we met. I do think that it would be a tremendous boost to voter confidence in the integrity of elections in the states if there was assurance that only citizens are voting. Similarly, that they're only voting once. I think that's also very important. And the current self-certification system has not only allowed people to maliciously vote when they weren't entitled to, it's actually led many legal immigrants to unknowingly cast a vote, and thereby putting their own ability to become United States citizens in peril. And we've seen this happen in Pennsylvania and other states. So I do think that it would be a tremendous boost to voter integrity and confidence. And that in turn would cause more Americans to come out to vote, which I think all of us want on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Mrs. Dhillon, another question. As you're aware, President Trump signed an executive order in January related to the measures to combat anti-Semitism. Senator Hawley touched on this earlier, but pursuant to that order, Attorney General Bondi earlier this month announced that the formation of a multi-agency task force to do this, to make sure that we're doing this. The task force will be coordinated through the Civil Rights Division. I have long been concerned about this issue and didn't think the Biden administration acted aggressively enough to address it, particularly on college campuses. So once confirmed as the head of the Civil Rights Division, can you ensure me that you will take aggressive action via this task force to ensure that Jewish students are protected from abuse and harassment, and that those who engage in such behavior will be subject to the full force of the law?
Well, Senator, this is a very high priority for me, and I have several Orthodox Jews who've worked at my law firm and have personally given me stories about their family circumstances and instances of discrimination on campuses and in other settings. Coming from a religious minority myself, I think it is very important and crucial that the Civil Rights Division step up to defend students on campus, because it is a blow not just to those individual students, but to the entire community when they see campus administrators refuse to protect them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Britt. You're so timely. Senator Booker.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Reitz, I want to pick up with a discussion that I found a little troubling. I'd love to go into it a little bit more with you. It just sounds like that you have been suggesting that government officials can ignore a court order if they disagree with it. You're pointing to some of the worst cases in our nation, like Korematsu. This would really create a constitutional crisis in this American context in which we're living right now. If our courts impose injunctions that restrict or compel government action, and then government officials go against that. To me, that's the very nature of what a constitutional crisis is. My staff pulled a tweet of yours that you compared the Dred Scott decision to the court's decision in same-sex marriages. And so I want to know, do you think public officials have it within their right, if they find it morally wrong, the Obergefell decision, to violate that court order or that court's conclusions?
Thank you, Senator Booker. So my position I've been consistent on, which is that parties to the litigation are bound by the lawful holdings of their respective court. I understand that there is genuine jurisprudential disagreement about the scope of certain holdings, whether they can apply nationally or to just litigants or other litigants. But I think that it is a fair discussion for attorneys in good faith to discuss the scope of a holding of a case.
I find academic discussions important in our national dialogue, but you're being nominated for a very important position. And my question to you, I guess, is very plain, is if you morally disagree with a court order, do you believe you can defy that court order, that the Trump administration, that the government, that you in your position can defy that court order?
Senator Booker, I appreciate the clarification. However, just a general reference in this hearing to a litigant morally disagreeing to the decision of a court, in my opinion, is too hypothetical for me to be able to answer with precision.
Do you understand that that is not a comfortable assurance for me when there is credible concerns about the Supreme Court making a decision as in Obergefell and having an administration that feels that it can defy that? You're not giving me great confidence by stating unequivocally that we are a nation that respects the separation of powers, the role of the courts. And far be it from me to lecture you, and I hope you don't take it that way. But the traditions of our country, if you disagree with a morally long law, the traditions we exalt, one of the two exceptions of statues underneath the dome of the Capitol is Martin Luther King, who was very clear about when you find a law morally wrong and you break that law, you accept the consequences of that, which is jail or removal from a position. I'm seeing right now good faith actors within government resigning from their position. That is a very different tradition, that vaunted tradition in our country, than a person in a position like you were nominated from, willfully disregarding a court order. That is in its very nature a constitutional crisis. And your failure in this forum to resolutely state your commitment to abide by court orders, I hope you can understand why that would be troubling to many of the senators before you. You understand that that's troubling.
I understand, Senator Booker, that is a perspective that members of this body may have.
Very difficult for me to swallow that. And honestly, you send a chill to me and my concerns about the current administration. Ms. Dhillon, I am happy to see you here because of the pride of your family behind you. You could see it written over their faces. I hope you understand that. They are just extraordinary for me as an American to see you sitting here and your incredible family behind you. I have some very direct questions for you that I do not have time with because I fear the chairwoman, but I'm going to put them in writing, and they have to do with your knowledge of any plans to dismiss employees and a lot of the things were going on here that do rise concerns to me. So I'll put them in writing. Would you commit to responding to me?
Yes, Senator, I commit to responding to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam
Thank
Chairwoman.
you, Senator Booker. You too are timely.
Thank you for the same kindness that you extend to me, that you extend to my colleague.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few moments ago, one of my colleagues asked a question about abiding by the rule of law and abiding by Supreme Court decisions. Now, when the Supreme Court ruled that President Biden didn't, in fact, have authority to undertake his student loan forgiveness program, President Biden made a statement following that to the effect of the following, quote, "The Supreme Court blocked it, but that didn't stop me," flouting openly his defiance of the Supreme Court and the rule of law. Now, so I'd like to ask each of you, we'll start with Mrs. Dhillon and then go to Mr. Reitz and Mr. Sauer. Just to be clear, in your view, does President Biden's statement hold water, and would you follow the rule of law if confirmed to your position?
Senator, thank you for that question. I too was surprised at President Biden's reaction to that order, because the order itself, I think many lawyers would agree, was entirely consistent with the law. No argument was made by the president that the order was unconstitutional, illegal, immoral, etc. He just simply defied it. So I think
Sort
that's
of like possession is 9/10 of the law, is what he was saying.
correct. And I think that's a little bit hard to swallow. In general, there are many mechanisms for a party to disagree with a ruling, seek a stay, seek an appeal, etc. And those are the steps you would normally take, seek reconsideration. In this case, it was, of course, the highest court in the land. So in that circumstance, I disagree with the president's position.
Mr. Wright?
Thank you, Senator Lee. Yes, if confirmed, you personally, this body, the American people, have my absolute commitment to always observe the letter of the law, no doubt about it. I think my reaction to President Biden's brazenly flouting a Supreme Court decision in which he was a litigant and thus lawfully bound to the holding of that court was disappointing and unlawful.
Mr. Sauer?
Thank you, Senator Lee. I agree with my colleagues. On a personal note, as Senator Schmidt mentioned in his introduction, we were directly involved in litigating on that issue in the decision that became Nebraska against Biden. So having taken all those efforts, those sorts of statements were particularly troubling.
Right.
And if confirmed, I will follow the rule of law.
Thank you. Mrs. Dhillon, the position to which you've been appointed, to which you've been nominated, is one that in some ways gets to the essence of the professional obligation we have as lawyers to represent clients as they come to us, even especially when that client happens to be unpopular, even especially when that client doesn't necessarily have the winds of public opinion at his or her back. Now, you've had a prestigious career in civil rights law, in which you've represented unpopular clients, in which you've represented people who have been forgotten by much of society and even much of the modern civil rights movement. How do you believe the Civil Rights Division can be utilized in order to look out for those people?
Thank you, Senator Lee, for that question. Civil Rights Division was established in 1957, and it has a long and storied history of standing up for some of the most important heroes in the civil rights movement, including looking into violent crimes against many marchers in the civil rights movement and other important figures, Martin Luther King Jr. and others. And so I would view my role, if confirmed, to be consistent with that obligation. And as a lawyer involved in First Amendment cases, you're often asked to defend and protect some of the most outrageous and unpopular speech. My work at the ACLU and dating back to college has taught me the importance of standing up for the rights of free speech and rights of individuals to protest, whether you agree or disagree with the subject matter or not. And that would definitely be my charter if confirmed. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Sauer, you've been nominated to serve as Solicitor General of the United States. The Solicitor General, of course, performs many of the roles that a lot of Americans probably associate with the Attorney General. You are the chief litigator for the United States government, particularly in matters pending before the U.S. Supreme Court and other federal appellate courts. Consequently, in that position, if confirmed, you'll have a client. So I've got two closely related, very important questions connected to that. Number one, who is your client? Number two, will you wear the morning suit if confirmed as Solicitor General?
You can answer briefly.
Your client, as the Solicitor General, if I were to confirm, would be the United States and the people of the United States. Your fidelity would be to the Constitution and the rule of law. And I commit to wearing the morning suit, but I will not look nearly as good as your father did when he wore it.
Terrific. Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. I was over at an ag hearing, which was just a little more mellow. So I am happy to be here. Ms. Dhillon, I know we're going to talk on the phone at some point soon, and I appreciate it that you're willing to do that. I've led efforts to protect voters' access to the polls and the security of our elections, the Freedom to Vote Act, setting basic national standards to make sure all Americans can vote in a way that works best for them, regardless of their zip code. John Lewis once said, "The right to vote is precious and almost sacred and one of the most important blessings of our democracy. Today, we must be vigilant in protecting that blessing." Do you agree?
Senator, I agree with everything that you said with respect to the importance of the right to vote. I think it is a sacred right, and I promise to safeguard that right if confirmed to this position.
Okay, thank you. Your comments earlier, though, you've written about the Voting Rights Act, referring to it as a law, and this was in 2022, referring it to as a law that, quote, was once, and I emphasize once, necessary to push back on Jim Crow laws. I have concerns about, of course, the Civil Rights Division under your leadership, whether or not it will enforce the Voting Rights Act. Isn't it true that 2 years ago, the Supreme Court reaffirmed Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits states and localities from enacting laws or taking actions that have the effect of denying or abridging the right to vote on the basis of race?
That's correct, Senator. And I would add that I don't know the full context of the quote that you read, but of course, we all know that the United States Supreme Court has actually struck down provisions of the Voting Rights Act as unconstitutional, specifically Section 4A, which effectively renders Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act a nullity unless Congress acts to fill in the gaps.
I was referring to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in Allen v. Milligan. But will you commit, the bigger thing for me, to vigorous enforcement of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, including with respect to groups that have been subject to historic discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, or language minority status?
Thank you, Senator. I would have to see the facts, but if the facts merited a Section 2 investigation and or legal action, I would certainly pursue that.
Okay. Will you commit to not reassigning or firing career attorneys in the division based on their political and ideological affiliations, who they voted for, or their views of the 2020 election?
Senator, without getting into the job itself and understanding all of the motivations of individuals, I can't really commit to any particular personnel decisions. However, I will say that in my home state of California, we have laws about that, and that is certainly my general practice to not react against people based on solely on their political views.
Right. Mr. Sauer, at the nomination hearing for President Trump's first-term Solicitor General, Noel Francisco, Chair Grassley said, quote, "It is the responsibility of the Solicitor General to defend the law even when they don't personally agree with the law," end quote. Mr. Francisco agreed, stating that the Solicitor General is a lawyer representing the United States. What matters are the views expressed by the United States in the statutes that this body passes. Do you agree it is the duty of the Justice Department to defend the laws Congress passes, and will you commit to do so even when the president may disagree with an act campaigned against its passage or called for its repeal?
I believe Mr. Francisco stated that the duty of the Solicitor General is to defend the validity of congressional enactments when there are reasonable arguments available to do so. I think he noted an exception in certain cases where there's a conflict between a claim of encroachment on the president's Article 2 authority, and I would commit to following those principles that he outlined in his testimony.
All right. I also note that on her first day in office, the Attorney General issued a memo in which she said DOJ lawyers must be zealous advocates for their clients' interests. And then she said, and this was troubling to many of us, and to do otherwise deprives the president of the benefits of his lawyers. When you served as a prosecutor in the Eastern District of Missouri during the Obama administration, did you see yourself as President Obama's lawyers?
I believe as an attorney for the Department of Justice at any level, as I said to Senator Lee, the client of that attorney would be the United States or the people of the United States.
All right. So Thank you. And all justice lawyers, as you know, take an oath to the Constitution. And as you note, their client is the people of the United States. I asked this of Todd Blanche, and he answered that is true. And so your client will in fact be the United States government and the United States of America and not the president. That's right?
I stand by my prior answer.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Senator Klobuchar. Appreciate all of you being here today. Certainly, I think, based on my history as a federal prosecutor and a judge and attorney general of the state of Florida, I think the roles in which you are volunteering to serve and have accepted these nominations are some of the most important roles in our government, especially at this moment in time when so many people believe, so many Americans believe that the Department of Justice and agencies within it have been used to unfairly target those that may hold a different political preference or persuasion. It is so important for the stability and consistency and long-term success of this nation to have people like you, patriots, passionate about this country and its founding principles in these roles, to assure Americans that we are going to bring this back to a place where Americans can trust that you are the institution of the Department of Justice is a shield protecting not only American safety, but their inalienable rights. Do you believe at its core that is one of the missions that you will fulfill? And I'll ask each of you to answer, please.
Thank you very much for the question, Senator, and I greatly appreciated the ability to work with you and your staff when I was in the State Attorney General's office on many important issues.
Oh, and let me just pause right here. I know that you said that you equally adored the two Missouri Attorney Generals, but you never said which Attorney General on the dais you liked and respected the most. And, you know,
Only one here right now.
you can always go with Florida. It doesn't have to be your home state.
There are many wonderful public servants in the room, and I respect them all greatly. And in response to your question, yes, I don't think I can improve on the way that this principle is expressed in the quotations from President Trump's inaugural address that I referenced in my opening statement.
Mr. Reitz.
I 100% agree with you, Senator Moody.
Ms. Dhillon.
And Senator, I would agree with you as well.
At this time, without objection, I would like to introduce for the record a letter from all 4 women Republican attorneys general, my former colleagues, where they voiced support for you, Ms. Dhillon, and we'll enter that into the record without objection. One of the things that they highlighted, and I noted that we share this in common, and most people don't know this about you because they hear what's only pushed and highlighted within the media, but as a young lawyer and continuing through this day, you have, without charge, free of charge, using your skills as an attorney and for pro bono, defended victims, sought justice for victims of sex trafficking and domestic violence. I remember after working long days at my law firm, going and sitting at the courthouse and helping victims of domestic violence. I believe that shows your heart for protecting the most vulnerable in their time of need that may not understand how to navigate the court system and understand that the court system is there for their protection. And I believe that's what you will bring in heart and spirit and passion to this role. To that end, you've spoken to this. As Attorney General, I was one of the first to request that a large corporation be investigated for discrimination for some of their hiring practices using racial quotas. I also brought suit, one of the first of the kind in the nation, when pregnancy crisis centers were being firebombed and threatening messages were being written on them to make sure that we were protecting the life of those that are pro-life America, or protecting the rights of pro-life Americans. Many of these duties would fall under the DOJ. I hope that you will go back and review where that might not have been done under the last administration. And do you assure this body and this committee that you will make every effort to do what this government is intended to do, why it was set up to be a government of the free people, first and foremost, to protect our rights? Will you confirm for this body that you will make sure that every American is protected under your tenure and leadership?
Senator, thank you for that question. And I'm deeply touched by the support from the women attorneys general. And it is an issue dear to my heart. But Absolutely, as I mentioned, my entire legal career has spoken to the fact that protecting the rights of the defenseless and following the law and enforcing those civil rights laws has and will be a passion of mine and a top priority to make sure that the defenseless and those who look to the United States for justice will certainly have an open door in the Civil Rights Division.
Thank you so much. And under 5 minutes, I am concluding my questioning as a model for all of my colleagues. All right, we will now turn it over to Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping you'd confer to me your extra 15 seconds, but
Not a chance.
Colleagues, before jumping into my questions for the nominees before us, just have to express not just disappointment, but alarm. There's been a number of Department of Justice nominees that have come before us, most, if not all, echoing over and over again the respect for the Constitution, the commitment for the Constitution, a commitment to the rule of law. Yet when pressed about whether or not they would be loyal to the Constitution versus potential directives or decisions contrary to existing law and the Constitution, they don't give strong answers, at least none that give us the comfort level that the American people need and deserve. When it comes to something as simple as existing law says this, a court has ordered the administration to stop doing that, to obfuscate, to not, I can't remember a time in history when of all the nominees, Department of Justice, high-ranking Department of Justice officials not adamantly defending the balance of power, co-equal branches of government, the checks and balances built into the Constitution is telling of the political times that we're living in and alarming. That being said, I know my time is limited, so let me jump into a couple of questions for the folks before us. First, from Mr. Sauer. Now, as Solicitor General, you're tasked with representing the United States before the Supreme Court, should you be confirmed. As an attorney, though, admitted to any state bar in the country, you're tasked with obeying and defending the Constitution of the United States. Now, the president's already defied the Constitution and Supreme Court precedent in issuing an executive order in regards to birthright citizenship. We talked about this in my office. I told you I was going to ask you in this hearing. Can you please articulate for the committee the current binding Supreme Court precedent with respect to birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment?
Thank you, Senator Padilla, for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to meet with you. I really appreciated the cordial conversation that we had on Monday evening in your office. I do recall that in that conversation, you asked me to look at certain 19th century Supreme Court decisions, and I agreed to do that. I have done that since then. However, given that this is a matter that would be very likely to come within my purview, I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to comment
Another
on.
dodge. Thank you. Ms. Dhillon. Now, your record demonstrates to me, and as a fellow Californian, I've seen your work closely, you've opposed key voting rights protections over the years, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. You fought against the use of Voting Rights Act to challenge discriminatory laws. You've also spread disinformation about the 2020 election, and you defended restrictive voting laws in multiple states. Now, in 2019, you sued the California Department of Motor Vehicles, alleging issues with the state's motor voter program. However, an audit found no widespread voter fraud. The lawsuit was unsuccessful, and that was just one of, I think, about 10 lawsuits that you brought against the state when I was Secretary of State, all unsuccessful, many dismissed. Will you commit, or how can you convince us that based on this track record that you would equally enforce, fairly enforce voting rights through the Department of Justice?
Thank you for your question, Senator. When we had the opportunity to meet in your office yesterday, I gave you one example of California's failure to abide by the NVRA and make its voter rolls clean, and that is 1 million voters, quote unquote, in Los Angeles County alone, which the County of Los Angeles agreed in a consent
my
decree.
recollection, so I'm going to cut you off because my
to-
time is limited. My recollection is the county agreed to adopt additional practices on maintaining voter rolls. All the lawsuits were unsuccessful.
Well, that's not true, factually, Senator. Actually, I've won several lawsuits against California at the United States Supreme Court during the
In
time
the
that
interest
you
of
were
my
the
time
Secretary of
left, a
State.
couple of questions for Mr. Reitz. Thank you for being here. Appreciate the time in my office. As part of our homework, I came across some disturbing social media posts of yours. I'd like to present them for the record and ask if they are indeed you, as they appear to be. In February of 2021, you wrote, Bostock is the worst SCOTUS decision since Obergefell. We all knew that'd be the case, but the left's almost total reliance on Bostock to support its insane cram down of the radical LGBTQ agenda is breathtaking. Is this you? Yes or no?
Senator Padilla, it was indeed nice visiting
Thank
with you the other day.
April of 2021, friendly reminder that birthright citizenship is not a thing. Was this your post? Yes or no?
That appears to be my X handle. Yes, Senator.
Thank you. November 2020. Once again, Chip is one of a tiny handful of Texas Republicans with a spine, unwilling to capitulate to an obviously fraudulent election. Wish there were others. Was this you or not?
That appears to be my X handle. Yes,
Thank you.
Senator.
Lastly, for the record, I know my time is up. In September of 2020, I believe it was, bring back the good old days. For the record, this is a picture of the infamous Joe McCarthy. Was this your post? Yes or no?
That appears to be my X handle, Senator.
Enough said. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do find it fascinating, though, that my friends on the other side of the aisle are very concerned all of a sudden about an administration ignoring Supreme Court decisions. Mr. Sauer, you and I brought the student loan debt forgiveness case. We won at the Supreme Court, and Joe Biden said, the Supreme Court blocked me. That didn't stop me. So this lawlessness we've seen over the last 4 years, all of a sudden my Democrat friends have found religion on abiding by Supreme Court decisions. Ms. Dhillon, I want to ask you a couple of questions. My colleagues on the other side tell us that you're a threat to civil rights. The truth is, I think you're one of the fiercest advocates of civil rights in a generation. On paper, civil rights are supposed to mean protection from discrimination based on characteristics like race. In practice, the entire civil rights bureaucracy as it currently exists is a vehicle for an entrenched new system of discrimination based on race. The left is right about one thing, in my view. There is systemic racism that exists in America today, but it's not Jim Crow or redlining or our criminal justice system. It's the pervasive racial discrimination that exists against Asians, whites, and other disfavored groups that take place now on college campuses, in the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies, even in the halls of our own government. It goes by a bunch of different names, principally equity or DEI or CRT. You can go on, but whatever you want to call it, it's wrong. And it has to stop. As Chief Justice Roberts eloquently put it, the best way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And that's one of the reasons I like you. I think unlike most quote unquote major civil rights organizations today, you oppose racial discrimination in all forms. So I want to ask you, is reverse racism still racism?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I don't even use the term reverse racism. It's just racism to discriminate on the basis of race.
I agree with you. And do civil rights protections apply equally to all races?
In my view, yes, they do, Senator.
Okay. In my view, we've got to root out this wokeism and this discrimination that's been under the cover, this cultural Marxism of DEI that I'm glad President Trump is taking out of the federal government. But you've seen this obviously play out in the private sector as well. In 2023, Target, the company, Target, the store, explicitly stated that as part of its REACH initiative, it wanted to hire 20% more Black employees in overt racial quota system. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Racial quotas violate our civil rights. Does Target's practice of having racial quotas raise red flags for you?
Well, Senator, if the facts are as you just described them, I believe that practice is illegal and unconstitutional.
And so one of the things that I find fascinating based on from the last administration, against companies like SpaceX, for example, the Biden administration brought hundreds of civil rights actions How many actions did the Biden administration bring against DEI racial quotas? Are you aware?
I'm not aware of any, Senator.
Well, I know the answer to it. It's Blutarski. It's 0.0. None. Because this is the truth. My friends on the other side had a system in place that needs to fundamentally be dismantled. The left views this again as cultural Marxism, a way to divide the room by race, and it's tearing this country apart. You have a really important role that you're going to step into when you're confirmed. I think you're going to get confirmed to try to end this. We shouldn't have racial quotas in this country. People should be judged on their merits. We need to bring merit back. It's not a four-letter word. It's actually a bedrock principle that's made this country such a great place. And regardless of your skin color, you should have every opportunity to succeed. But you also shouldn't be held back because of your skin color either. And again, I think this leftist movement that the Democrats have been captured by, they totally lost the plot, and the American people have rejected it. Part of what the American people did in November, I think, is they sat in that jury box and they watched all this craziness over the last 4 years, and they rejected it. And you, given your background and your experience, and I think your grit to fight these tough fights, I couldn't think of anybody more qualified to do the job that you're about to do. So congratulations, and you have my support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. And I would like the record to reflect, I believe this is the first time in the history of the Republic the word Blutarski has been used in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And with that, Senator Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sauer, you've served as one of the president's defense lawyers. Should cases arise in the Justice Department involving the same cases in which you represented him, will you recuse yourself?
Senator, thank you for the question. As reflected in the ethics agreement that I have signed and in the regulations of the Department of Justice, as to any matter that were to come before me that might require a recusal obligation, I would consult with the Department of Justice ethics officials and follow my recusal obligations.
So you'll consult with the career ethics lawyers at the department?
Yes, that's correct.
You are aware, of course, that the career ethics officials at the department have been fired, demoted, transferred. They no longer exist. The two people in that office are one of your fellow criminal defense lawyers of Donald Trump and a political appointee who graduated from law school just a few years ago. They don't exist. So who are you going to consult? Are you going to go to one of his other criminal defense lawyers to find out if you should recuse yourself?
Senator, I'm not aware of any personnel actions that you've described, so I can't speak directly to those. I've just recently been through a process where I was consulting closely with a career
I'll
DOJ
tell you,
ethics
Mr.
attorney.
Sauer, those actions have taken place. And the two appointees are political appointees. The people who will make the recusal recommendations to you are political appointees. One was Mr. Bove's former chief of staff. The other was a fellow criminal defense lawyer for Donald Trump. If that's who you're going to for recusal advice, no one can have confidence that that judgment will be made properly. But let me move on to another question. You took the position as Donald Trump's lawyer that he could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent and not be prosecuted for it unless he was impeached first. Should the president order the use of violence against a political appointment, will that continue to be your position as the lawyer for the United States? Will you represent to the court that any prosecution should be dismissed if the president is not first impeached?
Senator, I believe the exchange that you're referring to, which occurred during oral argument in the DC Circuit in that presidential immunity decision, I was asked a question about that, and what I responded was that the president may be prosecuted for an action like that, but under the plain language of the impeachment judgment clause, he must be first impeached and convicted by the Senate.
And as the judge in that argument made clear, that means your position is he cannot be prosecuted unless he's impeached first. So he can order the use of his office to use violence against a political opponent, and you would defend his ability to do that in any criminal prosecution unless he's impeached. Is that your testimony?
I believe this situation came up with respect to a real world example.
Well, I'm giving you,
if I may,
I'm giving you, yes. You'll answer my question.
Yes, I believe I am answering the question. President Obama ordered the essential killing of U.S. citizens located abroad by drone strike. And my colleague on the other side of that case was
My
asked-
question is not about President Obama and using a drone strike against a terrorist. My question is Donald Trump using his office to assassinate a political opponent. If he's not impeached for it, would you defend against any prosecution as Solicitor General?
The hypothetical you've offered respectfully is so outlandish. I don't know if I'm in position to address it.
Well, you addressed it for the court, but you won't address it for the country in this hearing?
I think I've just said exactly the same response that I
Okay,
gave
then
before, which
exactly
is
the
that
same
document-
response is that you would evidently defend him against prosecution for that. Let me move on to the last question. The department moved to dismiss a corruption case against the mayor of New York. The acting Southern District of New York U.S. attorney refused to undertake an action that she believed was deeply unethical. So then it fell on her number two, Hagan Scotton, to do the dirty deed of dismissing this case. This is what he said. Any assistant U.S. attorney would know our laws and traditions do not allow using the prosecutorial power to influence other citizens, much less elected officials, in this way. If no lawyer with an earshot of the president is willing to give him that advice, then I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me. My question to you, Mr. Sauer, is, would that be you?
Would
that be you if it fell to you to dismiss that case? Would you be the coward or fool willing to dismiss that case on behalf of the president?
I certainly can't speak to any official action that I might or might not take in a hypothetical scenario. I will say that there was a distressing lack of letters like this during the weaponization of justice.
Well, there is a disturbing presence of letters like this, and your answer tells me that it would be you. My colleagues have praised your legal skills. I have no doubt about your knowledge of the law. But to me, you can't be a good lawyer if you use the law to subvert the law, if you use our system to undermine our system. And I'm deeply afraid that's what you've done, and that's what you will do in this position. I yield back.
Let me say to the three of you, thank you for agreeing to serve our nation. Thank you for going to the Department of Justice. I will note my Democrat colleagues who are suddenly deeply concerned about the rule of law all seem to have entered the witness protection program during the 4 years of the Biden presidency, when the Biden Department of Justice was the most lawless and partisan Department of Justice our nation has ever seen. And not a single Democrat on this committee could be bothered to be concerned in the slightest about the weaponization of the Department of Justice to attack President Biden's political opponents, about Merrick Garland's refusal to enforce the law, including refusing to protect Supreme Court justices when a clear federal statute made it a crime to protest and threaten the lives and families of Supreme Court justices, and yet the Biden Department of Justice refused to follow that law. Now, Mr. Sauer, I will note that you and I share a lot of legal history. We both attended the same law school. We both clerked for the same judge, Michael Ludig, on the Court of Appeals. You clerked for the late, great Justice Antonin Scalia. We both started our legal career practicing under Chuck Cooper, one of the finest Supreme Court litigators on the planet. You've been nominated to an incredibly important position, Solicitor General of the United States, a position frequently referred to as the 10th Justice. It is the only position in the entire federal government that is required by statute to be, quote, learned in the law. I will note I am grateful that is not a requirement to serve on the Senate Judiciary Committee. But I would ask you to share with this committee and share with the American people what is the responsibility of the Solicitor General, and how will you carry out this task if and when you are confirmed?
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the opportunity to meet and discuss legal issues facing the United States. I believe I responded to earlier questions that the role of the Solicitor General is to defend both the statutes of the United States that are enacted by Congress and the executive actions of the executive branch. The Solicitor General does so on behalf of the client of the U.S. Department of Justice, which is the United States, the American people, and does so consistent with and with fidelity to the Constitution and the rule of law.
Well, thank you, and I have every confidence you will do exactly that. Mrs. Dhillon, as a Sikh woman who immigrated to the United States at a young age, how has your background shaped your understanding of civil rights, and how can that perspective enhance the Civil Rights Division in advocating for all Americans from all backgrounds?
Thank you for that question, Senator. I would put it this way. My faith itself teaches first openness to all, respect for all, and protecting the defenseless. Those are among the tenets of the Sikh faith. And so that is why you see so many Sikhs volunteering in war-torn areas and doing relief work around the world. And so it's actually a tenet of our faith to contribute towards those efforts. So it's been my entire career that I have served in that capacity, motivated by my faith and my teachings in my home. And my career has also demonstrated many instances, as other senators have mentioned, of pro bono work, doing work for people who could not get a lawyer otherwise. And so I'm proud of that work. In the Civil Rights Division, there is a long and storied history of doing exactly the same thing, which is standing up for the most disadvantaged individuals in our United States and ensuring equal justice for all. And so I would definitely be informed by those lifetime experiences, including 32 years as a lawyer representing the underprivileged.
And let me ask you, how have your experiences as someone who's been subjected to racial profiling and abuse, and in particular the incident in 1995 when you and your husband were attacked on a bus, can you please briefly describe that and how that will inform how you will carry out the roles running the Civil Rights Division?
Well, thank you, Senator. In the early 90s, as a newlywed, I got a terrible phone call from the chaplain at NYU that my husband, who was a medical resident in that program, had been shot and brought to NYU. He'd been shot in the chest by a racist who confronted him on a crowded New York City bus during rush hour and told him to get out of his face and to apologize, and used numerous ethnic slurs. And when my then husband refused to apologize, he was shot. And so it really brought home to me that no matter what your education, your affluence, your background, there are instances in which bigots and racists will operate in society to try to harm people. And it is up to lawyers to then stand up to that and make sure that there are severe punishments. Unfortunately, that was New York City. And in that case, the person was not severely punished for shooting my then husband in the chest.
Wow, that's truly horrible. Mr. Reitz, I have one question for you. Will you tell this committee what the rule against perpetuities is?
If the chairman will grant me, I know that we're over time, if I may answer.
You may answer.
No interest is good unless it must vest, if at all, not later than 21 years after some life and being at the creation of the interest.
Very good. I want to enter into the record multiple letters in support of Mr. Reitz's nomination, a letter from the National Association of Police Organizations, a letter from former editorial board members of the Texas Review of Law and Politics, a letter from the MLK Association of Texas, a letter from the chairman of the Board of Regents at Texas Southern University, a letter from